What is up, my ninjas? I am Strident, and welcome to my Mattel Multiverse Aquaman and Black Manta review. I found these figures actually a couple of weeks ago. I want to say it was sometime last month. And I've been wanting to get to them for a while, but a whole bunch of other stuff has been coming in, which normally doesn't happen. But I managed to find these out in the wild, and I am super impressed, and I have a lot of things to say about these figures with very few negatives to point out. So it looks like Mattel is they've switched things up, and I mean, outside of a few hiccups that I found out in recent weeks or days actually, with the layoffs, the mass layoffs, some of this looks like it will be the blueprint going forward. I would hope that Mattel would learn from their mistakes with the DCUC line and the Signature line and the previous multiverse figures and see how they've managed to improve with the new sculptor that they just let go, whose fingerprint is all over these multiverse figures. So anyway, I'm going to get into the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between, and let you know what is actually up with these figures, if they're worth the buy. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. Here we go. Now, from head to toe, these guys are extremely impressive. You could just see the detail. I mean, much like the Marvel Legends movie figures or Marvel Studio series Marvel Legends figures, the movie figures tend to have more detail simply because the designs featured in the films usually have more detail. And not only is it just detail, but they're actually functional. I mean, the articulation has been improved too. I mean, I know that's not what we're focusing on in this portion of the video, but it's something I have to note. I was able to do a lot of stuff with this Aquaman that I can't do with the previous one. Same with Black Manta, especially with Black Manta. And it's strange because the previous Black Manta was, and the previous Aquaman, which is the two from DCUC that I had, at least, they had the DCUC articulation, which wasn't terrible, and they have so much less detail on them. You would expect them to be easier to pose and easier to move around and such, and that's not the case here. You can see, though, I have the one from the Black Manta and the Aquaman from the 2-pack years ago, the DCUC 2-packs, and this one has that weird neoprene kind of feel to it, and the surface is kind of rubbery, but over the years it's kind of just like either worn away or melted or something. It's sticky to the touch. We got none of that shit going on here with this new Black Manta. It's all armor all the time, and it works perfectly. I don't understand why they would have gone in any other way. Same thing goes for Aquaman. The face sculpt, all the surface detail on his armor, everything. I mean, that's unmistakably Jason Momoa. Unmistakably so. The armor looks functional. It looks like something a warrior would be wearing, and it's flashy enough for you to believe it's like a warrior king's stuff. You know what I'm saying? His armor. And I dig it. I dug the design from day one when I saw the Prime 1 statue. I was like, yeah, if this is for real, they're doing it, again, they're doing it again. I mean, look at the detail on those boots, and I'm going to go into more detail with that too, but these guys are just on a different level when it comes to sculpt. They're easily the best Black Manta and Aquaman that we've released, or that we've received, I'm sorry, both comic and anything else. You know what I mean? They're just not going to top this. I mean, unless we get a new one for the next movie when they make the next movie. But the detail is awesome. Black Manta is light on paint, but not the way that you would think he is. He's got different finishes as far as the black goes. So technically something's been applied. That could be some gloss finish paint on the shiny black parts, like around the eyes and such. But and then he has the red metallic paint on the eyes. I don't know, the paint is just, it's beautiful, and it helps accent the sculpt. And speaking of sculpt, here's the Collect and Connect figure. It's the Trench Warrior. Between the two of them, you get the head and torso with Black Manta, and then you get the right leg with Aquaman. And I have to say, all the gruesome details are here, but he looks amazing. I really dig it. I mean, like, even the paint once again, really helps accentuate the awesomeness of this sculpt. It's really gnarly and gruesome looking somewhat, but it works, you know? And the fact that you get the majority, I mean, you literally have 75% of the figure with 2 figures because there's only 4 figures in the wave. I kind of like this strategy better than the 9, 10, 7 figures in a wave that you get with your Marvel Legends, because I can get the collect and connect done faster. But up until these figures, I want to say these were the first Aquaman figures I had, with the Total Justice one being the first, the Secret Files of the Justice League, or Classified, Justice League Classified Aquaman being the second, with the Lady of the Lake hand. And I felt like it was a cool upgrade to this one because, he had the hook during the 90s, and then the end of the 90s into the 2000s, he had the water hand, which was dope. So, he was a fitting second figure for me. And if you notice, though, my first 2 Aquaman figures did not have tridents. They couldn't hold anything. They didn't have holding things hands. So then I got the DCUC version, and he had an awesome trident. He had holding thing hands, and he was more of the classic look with both hands and everything, and I thought that was cool. Then the Justice League movie came out, and I was like, shit, I gotta get this. Jason Momoa is kind of what I always imagined for an Aquaman. I wanted a Pacific Islander or something like that. Something different than the Ubermensch version that we had all become accustomed to. And as you can see, a lot has been carried over, but a lot has been left behind from Justice League to Aquaman, the Aquaman figure looks like he just stepped out of the water. His hair is all, wet and matted down. It's not all dry and dreadlock looking like Rob Zombie and shit. Like, they simplified it. And I get it. This is also more of a Poseidon look, but I kind of like this better. Even though at times in the movie he has, fuller hair. I still like this. But the armor, just looking at the differences in armor, it's just like, man, they really did a good job translating, from like armor that is used by probably soldiers and such to, what the king would wear, and I would assume that at some point, maybe back in the day, his father or the King Atlan had a cape, you know what I mean? I would assume. It's the only thing that's lacking from this design, but just look at the difference, even the way the scales are, designed, the way that the shape of the scales, they don't mimic his tattoos. Instead, they mimic they mimic what, like an octagonal shape now, as opposed like the honeycomb shape, which I like. Aquaman specifically has shitloads of detail all over the place, and excuse my French, but that's how I get down here. Just detail out the wazoo, and it all looks good. I mean, there's the A that we saw that was prominently on several different versions of Aquaman. I want to say most notably the New 52 version. But I mean, they did it again, man. Design-wise, I love what Warner Brothers has been doing with a lot of the characters. It's just like, I can't complain when I look at them next to their comic book counterparts. And if we're being fair, Warner Brothers has almost always been good with that, unless you count Gotham. That show is horrendous, and the designs don't match. And I don't care that there's a Joker version on there that's somewhat similar. Joker's a simple-ass design. So if you fuck that up, that means you weren't trying. You know what I mean? You definitely weren't trying hard enough. But when we're looking at just accuracy and literally translating what we used to get into something more, fitting of a modern era, big screen production, this is it. I mean, look at those gloves with the silverish gray in between the green on his fingers. You can tell it's armor on top of a more malleable material. This is kind of like the Nomex gloves, or your tactical gloves that, we wear in today's, various armed forces. You have armor pieces on the back of his arm instead of on his shoulder. You have little, it almost looks like seaweed or, I don't know, kelp or something. Just some kind of underwater plant moving around his leg and his feet, providing armor. And it looks good. I mean, it's armor, but the design aesthetic feels like he's standing on the ocean floor, and the seaweed is kind of wrapped around his leg, and it's beautiful. I mean, this is all like the stuff that you look for in a design. And I mean, the fact that Mattel painted all this stuff on a mass retail release, it's amazing. Now, the only thing they left out are these fins on the backs of his calves. I always thought those were awesome, and they had to serve some kind of purpose for someone that can swim so fast underwater. But for some reason, they left those out. Maybe they swapped them for the weird things popping off the gloves. I don't know, but that's my only thing, and it's not even a gripe because the suit looks amazing without it. I think personally it would have set it off if you put those things, the little fins on the back of his legs. But you know, it looks dope regardless. And now before we move on, I got to get these problems, issues, and nitpicks out of the way. The first, and it's the only thing with Aquaman, is he has one holding thing's hand. Sure, it looks awesome when you pose him much like he was posed in the movie poster, but outside of that, why would you only give him one holding thing's hand? Especially with something staff-like, a weapon that is staff-like, that requires you to use both hands. Why would you do it? And I almost guarantee you that when we watch the film, you're going to see him two-hand the staff and do cool shit with that. It just doesn't make sense. And it makes it where you're going to probably have to figure out a way to get an Aquaman to have two of these awesome gloved hands. So I don't know how we'll do it, but I got to figure something out. Black Manta. So, I only ever had one version of Black Manta, and it was the comic book version that was from DCUC. And it was not even the first version of that, it was the second version of that from the 2-pack with Aquaman, like I showed you earlier. And this one kicks the living shit out of every version that came before it, including the DCUC versions. It's easily the best Black Manta ever, but it's not without its flaws. So, I'm going to point out my issues with this figure. The extra blade on that other hand, it just won't stay straight. Maybe I'm not heating it up enough, but out of the package it came warped severely, and I can't get it to straighten out, which really pisses me off. And outside of covering it in like super glue or Gorilla Glue, I don't really know what else there is to do. I'm going to try to heat it again and see if I can get it to straighten out. But that is just terrible. There should have been an option to remove it, and that might be the next thing I'll do, is I might have to chop, I might have to chop it off. But it's a cool idea that should have had a little bit more functionality built into it. Like it comes separate and you apply it to the figure. But anyway, ignoring that and looking at the rest of the figure, I mean, he's covered from head to toe in details. It almost looks like he's wearing one of those Atlantean armored soldier costumes or armored suits. And it's been modified for a human. And I think it looks great. I mean, it looks like he's pretty unstoppable. And just by looking at him, you get a good idea why he's a threat to Aquaman. Why he's not an easily defeated foe, why his suit is almost invulnerable completely. I love it. I love it. I was really impressed with the direction they took with this design, because you would read that his suit could do A, B, C, D, E, F, G and all that shit, but you could never really tell by looking at it. Now you can tell. I mean, look at the articulated fans or thrusters on his back that will make him able to fly around or swim around, you know, Atlantis or underwater the way the Atlanteans do. It's just awesome. Also, look at the different finishes, like I said before. You have matte and you have gloss, like you see around his eyes. This figure is dope. It's just super dope. Kudos to Mattel for what they've done here. Now, these guys don't come with much in way of accessories. It's simply Aquaman's trident, which here you see the one from Justice League, the new one in the center, and the comic book version. You can see the inspiration and see that they paid attention to both. You know, you have the piece in the middle that's a little bit larger than what's on the, you know, the ends. You have the trident, obviously. The previous one in Justice League was simple. It was a quindent. It belonged to his mother. But it's captured really well here. Next, you have Black Manta's sword, which is the only thing he came with. And it looks like it's some kind of Atlantean-style sword, you know, short sword. It looks almost akin to like a Zephos, or like the short swords they usually substitute for a Zephos, but it looks good, and I can't wait to see what he does with it, because supposedly this version of Aquaman is David Kane, so he's also got that assassination background and martial arts background, so he should be fucking amazing in battle, and I can't wait to see this utilized in battle. So we're going to do something a little bit different with the articulation here. Since this is more of a showcase, I'm just going to go over kind of the broad range of what these figures can do. And I'm only going to really focus and highlight on what's different. So the hands. DCUCs and previous multiverse figures didn't really have any other articulation in the hands other than a swivel. This one has a up and down joint, so you can move up and down if you want to side, if you twist it sideways, you know, which is nice. It works for armored characters because usually the gauntlets kind of, I don't want to say they obstruct movement, but they're usually, if they have gauntlets that come high up, they don't really move that much. So you can, especially with this sword, if you want him kind of curling and squeezing his fist, you can do that. Double jointed knees and swivels, ankle pivots, not swivels, ankle pivots, as well as the double jointed knees. This is something we've been asking for so long, you know, and I kind of like them. I really like them, but I wish that the ankle swivel was still there, because I hate when you have one and not the other, because our ankles can turn as well as pivot. So there's an X and a Y axis, and we can only use one of the two axes, and that sucks. But for now, utilizing it for stances and making sure their feet are firmly planted, it's awesome. It works really well, and I'm surprised it took this long. And the range of motion in the thighs is just freaking dope. Also, characters like Aquaman and Black Manta have articulation above the elbow. So they have a bicep swivel, and then they have another swivel above the elbow, which seems to be something that Mattel has always done with movie figures, you know? Like they did it with the Green Lantern figures. I want to say there's at least one Batman figure from the Dark Knight line, and I could be wrong. It's possible they didn't do it with the Batman figures, but they did it with like Green Lantern. And Superman Returns. Ugh. But it's a piece of articulation I could do without. I would have rather had double jointed elbows, because, you know, you need more of a curl so that they can block, or so that they can, you know, hold a sword the right way, you know, things like that. But it works, and things are hidden really well, and the characters are able to pose really well, and it's something we should have had a long time ago. So I am not only impressed at how well it turned out, I am impressed that Mattel finally is moving forward. You know what I mean? They finally decided get rid of 95% of what they already had done to death with Multiverse and DCUC, and embrace a new direction, you know? I mean, and it's funny too, because as a DC fan, we don't have that much anymore, because DC Collectibles is not really making figures like they used to. We're lucky if we get, you know, 4 releases per year nowadays. And it's usually the same couple characters, but another thing they've been doing is just like the weird bombshell figures. So we don't really even get that much of like the actual comic book and movie stuff that we want. So, you know, it's awesome for Mattel to pick up the ball the way they have been. So I happen to have a decent amount of Aquaman figures, and I figured I would compare them for you, starting with the buff Secret Files and ending with the Total Justice. But as you see, I didn't put Total Justice in this one because clearly he's the smallest. But there's kind of a progression in size. Black Manta feels like a dude in armor. And then looking at him side by side with the original, it's just, what's the fucking point? One gives you the idea, and the other one is the fully realized idea. And this is why I'm so into the movie figures, or the more detailed, you know, even television figures. Here is Aquaman with the rest of the League as they appeared in Justice League. I dig it. They look good. I'm surprised that more people don't dig them, you know. The strangest thing about what Warner Brothers and DC is doing these days is the fact that the looks of these characters are perfect, but the quality of the films that they're in, the overarching quality of the writing in the films that they're in is so lacking. So, you know, no matter how cool they look, no matter how on point these comic book versions are, these movie versions of the comic book costumes are, if the movie is poorly done, it really stands out. And for us DC fans, it really hurts because there's not that much good live action DC shit unless we're watching TV, and that stuff is, it's in some ways debatable, but it's much better than the films by far. You know, I went back and I'm all caught up in Arrow, Black Lightning, and the Flash, and I'm pretty happy with what I've been watching. I haven't watched Supergirl in a while though, but yeah, Aquaman looks dope here, real dope. I think it's the brighter colors and the fact that he's a little bit larger than the majority of his teammates. It helps a lot because Jason Momoa is a big dude, and no matter how much trickery you use, he always comes off bigger than the rest of them, except for in the film. In the film, he seems slightly larger, but I like his size here. It makes him feel substantial, and the fact that he's brighter makes him feel more like, okay, his journey has taken him to that space where, you know, this is who he was supposed to be. So, you know, now he can stand alongside the Justice League, a complete hero. And now for the bottom line. You guys can tell from everything I've said, this figure is dope. I love it. I'm glad I picked it up. I am going to get the rest of them. I figure I'm going to wait until after Christmas and then see what sales are going on. But I really love what I've seen with these figures, or what I'm seeing with these figures. The double jointed knees, the pivots in the feet, the you know, the ab crunch is actually not bad. It's not the best ab crunch considering how much of it you see, like how big of a hinge it is, but it works. It doesn't look bad. The hinges at the hands, they work really well. The sculpt overall, it's like this can really, and I can't ever really fault them because Mattel has always made really good movie figures. Even, you know, say what you will about Green Lantern, but the figures were dope. I didn't have problems with them. The designs in the movie were fine. It's how they implemented those designs. But the figures themselves were kind of, you know what I mean? I'm sorry. The figures were dope, but the film itself was, you know, so much so that everybody, you know, they've already had their ha-has at the expense of that film. So I'm not going to even go back into that. But here, everything I'm seeing, that's why I'm giving you the slowest pan ever upward so you can see all the details. Everything is captured here. The colors are on point. The design work is on point because obviously if you don't have a good design to work from, your sculpt is going to just be shit. The sculpt work is amazing. I mean, this is like way better than what we're supposed to expect from Mattel. I mean, like, I've come to expect mediocrity from Mattel, and almost as a rule, I would go for Mafex, Figuarts, or DC Collectibles when it came to DC figures, or even Mezco, and I don't really like Mezco, and I think a lot of their figures are overrated. They do good work, though. The designs are awesome. It's just that I feel like for what, sometimes you don't get very much in a package, but all the figures cost the same amount, roughly, all across the board, and I don't feel like that's right. And their customer service is just ass, you know what I mean? At least in my experience, they're just complete shit when it comes to customer service. But in terms of what Mattel is doing now, if this is indicative of what they're going to be doing, which it may or may not be because they have just laid off a metric ton of employees, including the lead sculptor, who was responsible for this and the newer multiverse figures that you've been seeing from the sculpt and engineering point of view. So it makes me wonder if they needed someone to kind of show them the way, and you know, fire him once they got his shtick down, and then make the figures themselves and not have to pay him. Which sucks because corporations do this shit, you know what I mean? And it's funny because a lot of fans tend to do this fake brand loyalty thing where they act like it's unnecessary brand loyalty, where they act like the corporation loves them and gives a shit that they only buy those products, when in reality, all they give a shit about is your money. And what we're seeing here is another case of the corporate side undermining the quality side, you know, because when you look at the multiverse figures, you know, I want to say 2 waves back, and even that, it's kind of meh, you know what I mean? It's kind of hit or miss. But about 2, maybe 3 waves back, and then definitely if we go back farther to like when the Flash and Green Arrow and all that stuff were on their 2nd or 3rd season, and we had multiverse figures of them, you saw that they just didn't give a fuck. They had a good basic sculpt and understanding of the characters and the way they looked, like a what's the word I'm looking for? A mock-up almost, like the essence of the character. And then they just cut articulation in any old kind of way just to get it. And the figures just didn't work that well. You know, engineering-wise, they were really off. What we're seeing now is that the articulation and the sculpt are working together the way a figure should. You know, I've played with him even with the one hand holding the trident. And I was able to do what I wanted to do. You know, if I wanted him to stab at somebody, I just put him in the stabbing pose and make him stab. You know, if I wanted him to throw the thing, I put him in a throwing pose, and he throws his trident. So I don't have problems so much with what's missing with this figure. I just noticed that these things are missing, and they shouldn't be, to be honest. They should really have taken the extra time to make the articulation fit. And I'm sorry, with the other lines, they should have taken the time to make the articulation fit the sculpt. If that means that you have to, I don't know, negate a piece of or leave out a certain articulation or a point of articulation, you do it. Preserve your sculpt. And I know that may not be a popular opinion, because sometimes I've seen this argument come up, sculpt or articulation, which one takes precedence. If these are to be played with, sometimes less is more. History has shown that when a figure has less points of articulation, kids can play harder with it, you know? And kids are part of the demographics that, you know, these lines are meant to attract. It's not just us collectors. Even though they do make a kiddie line where they kind of shrink these characters down and they have much less articulation, especially in the legs, there's no excuse for why, you know, they would ever put out a shitty, awesome sculpt with shit articulation. But with that being said, we don't have those problems here. There's just a few nitpicks and a few issues that they need to get right, and maybe they will on a further out, you know, a later Aquaman figure. But as far as what I'm seeing now, this is win-win territory. So if you see these guys, you need to pick these guys up. You won't be sorry. There's absolutely nothing on them that is so wrong that you need to overlook these guys. You see that Aquaman looks awesome with the Justice League, and I have an eclectic bunch of figures. You know, I've got a bunch of Figuarts, one Mattel figure in there, and a Mezco. And then I have, well, I'm sorry, 2 Mattels, which is Cyborg, and then Aquaman, and, you know, my Mezco Superman. And they all still look good together because they all still carry the visages of the you know, their looks from Justice League. So they fit. They don't look wrong. And it's funny too because, you know, a lot of times people have this weird issue with classifying the figure. You know, these all came from Mezco, therefore they all have the same exact aesthetics, even if the designs are different, which doesn't make sense. If the designs are different, then they don't have the same aesthetics because they're different designs, designed by different people for different purposes. But sometimes when you're watching a film and characters are designed for that film, there's a certain design language that's present in everything that is in the film. So as long as the design is recreated correctly, all those little tiny pieces, those little, you know, nuggets that connect all those designs to that film, they'll all be present, and you'll have those figures looking good in your displays because they're related based on the fact that they come from the same film. And that's something I love, and I think you guys will dig it too. So that is it for me. This is the end of my look at the Multiverse Aquaman and Black Manta by Mattel. Um, I got to give them A's. You know what I mean? Even with the nitpicks, they're still A pluses because I never expect this kind of stuff out of Mattel. I say you pick these guys up as soon as you can. Look for them on clearance after Christmas. These were $20. I got these at Walmart. That's the only place I've seen them, actually. All the rest of the figures I see at Target, Walmart, a couple other places too. But yeah, check them out at your Walmart. And I think that's it for me. You guys have been great. I got a little surprise for you. It's something long overdue. But yeah, that's it for me. You've been great. Peace outside.